yet all different. And the subtitles of his two books actually indicate that reality appeared to him in terms of structure, because the subtitles are on the mechanics of consciousness and on the mechanics of creation. So Ben has designed instruments to study these physiological changes that occur in the body when a certain energy rises through the spine. In the East, it's called kundalini, or coiled serpent. It rises up the spine and awakens certain energies in the body, which allow perception to become broader, and the brain functions then on a different level. He called it his model of kundalini. Ben looked at reality as being driven by the force of evolution to infinity as consciousness unfolds itself. So in this graph, this arrow would represent the energy of evolution. And the bell curve, so-called, is a method to show graphically statistical data. And if the peak of this curve represents the average level of consciousness of humanity now, and the lower end of it shows the lowest level of consciousness, let's say the mafia types, as he used to put it, then the cutting edge here, the highest edge, would be individuals such as Einstein or Leonardo da Vinci. Now, as evolution pushes this ahead, some years from now, this bell curve will assume this position. So what will happen? That the average consciousness will be where the advanced consciousness is today. The low level will be where the average is today. And the high consciousness of humanity at that time will be something that we can hardly imagine. Because as he used to say, the potential of the human nervous system is enormous, and we really don't know where it's taking us, from humanhood to godhood. And this chart shows an experiment that he did with a subject sitting on a chair that had a device attached to it called ballistograph. And the ballistograph is something that picks up micro vibrations of the body. So the large curve that you see reflects the motion up and down of the subject as the breathing occurs. And then the small wiggly lines superimposed on that indicate the heartbeat. The lower part of the chart shows the same individual in a state of deep meditation, which also means deep relaxation. And look what happened. The breathing is practically gone. It's a straight line. And what was a disrupted pattern of the heartbeat has turned into a regular sine wave. And looking at this as an engineer, Ben said, this is an effect of harmonization of all the frequencies within the body, and the body is now resonating like a tuned instrument. And he came up with what he called the Kundalini syndrome model. In other words, when this energy in the spine rises, the harmony occurs where the vibration turns into the sine wave at 7 cycles per second, or 7 hertz, as compared to the regular disrupted pattern. And as an engineer, he looked at the body in terms of vibrating systems or oscillators. And in this case, there are 5. The heart-aorta system, the brain itself, a cavity in the brain which is filled with fluid, a ventricle, and then the brain itself, the sensory cortex, and then all this results in an electromagnetic field around the head. A system which comes into harmony within itself becomes more powerful than others, and it will entrain, this is another term he used, it will entrain or pull after itself a system that is out of harmony. So once this oscillator or resonating system comes into harmony, it will trigger the rest one after the other. It's a domino effect. So as the heart pumps blood through the aorta, and he called the aorta the biggest plumbing in the body. So it's a tremendous impact on the body, and it shakes the body so that it vibrates. It hits the bifurcation into the legs, and a certain plane wave is reflected up. The next pulse comes down, and the plane wave and the pulse clash, and it creates a disruption in the body. When the harmonious 7 hertz vibration is set up, it seems that the heart and the lungs begin to talk to each other, and they begin to work in harmony, so that a pulse comes down and waits for the reflection to come up, and they both go up together, and then the next pulse comes down, and there is no clash occurring anymore, and the body goes into resonance, triggering the next oscillator, which is the brain. And looking at the head, again, from the point of view of engineering, it's a rigid box resting on a resilient column, which is the spine. What happens is, as the body goes up and down, the skull is vibrated, and the brain, which is a gel-like substance, is floating in a fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, so that each time the body goes up, it's hitting the skull and then goes down, and so up and down it goes, and it creates a plane wave within the brain. The brain has a characteristic called piezoelectric, which means that when it's stimulated mechanically, it develops an electromagnetic field around it, which is this field right here eventually. So this is the second oscillator, which triggers the third. This is the fluid-filled cavity in the brain called ventricle. And due to this regular vibration of 7 cycles, or 7 hertz per second, a standing wave is created, is established in the ventricle, which again creates a very harmonious frequency. And this in turn triggers the sensory cortex. This is a cross-section of the brain, and this is a cross-section of the third ventricle filled with fluid. On top of the third ventricle is a drum-like surface with a bundle of nerve fiber crossing it, which connects the right and left brain hemispheres. And this is very important, because as the fluid vibrates harmoniously, it activates this nerve fiber, and it harmonizes the 2 brain hemispheres. And we know that consciousness opens up when the synchronization of the functioning of the 2 hemispheres occurs. And then a certain current is established in the sensory cortex in the lobe of the brain. And as I said before, all this results in an electromagnetic field around the head, so that the head actually becomes an antenna capable of sending out and receiving information which it could not do otherwise. And in that state, higher perceptions become possible. And this was Ben's theory, that through the mechanism of Kundalini and the resonant state of the body, higher perceptions become available. This is an illustration of the sympathetic resonance, how those oscillators trigger each other. If you pluck the strings of this violin, then the strings on this one will resonate without being touched. And this is how the oscillators relate to each other through resonance. And so, as we walk on this planet Earth, which is charged negatively, by the way, we are bathed in a sea of vibrations, of all kinds of electromagnetic fields and all kinds of frequencies, radio and others. And the ionosphere is charged positively, and the potential between the two is constantly fluctuating, so that we are subjected to all sorts of influences all the time. But in that state of resonance at 7 hertz, we plug into the vibration of the Earth itself, which is stable, and it happens to be the same 7 cycles per second, so that this biosphere around the Earth resonates at the same frequency, and we get locked into the frequency of the planet itself. And this is why the meditative state is such a relaxing state that some people find it difficult to come out of. Now, having become part of the vibration of the Earth, we then in turn plug into the vibration of the entire solar system. Because our Earth here is shown surrounded by all kinds of vibrations as well. There is the magnetopause, magnetosphere, plasma sheet, you name it, trapped radiation. There are acoustical waves, the solar wind coming from the sun, which is also affecting the Earth. So that having tuned into the frequency of the Earth, we in turn tune into the frequency of the entire solar system and the sun, and so on into the cosmos. This is the cosmic connection. As Ben measured these fields around the body, he found that at that frequency of 7 hertz, the field around the body expands the energy that can be measured, and it extends to about 20 inches and tapers off. In a situation where there were hundreds of people meditating at the same time, Ben conducted an experiment because many of these individuals reported hearing inner sounds inside their heads. So when he measured the frequencies of the sounds that they heard, he found that there was one major sound and then other peaks where many people heard certain frequencies. And as he looked at this, and of course this is in kilohertz, as he looked at this, he realized that these other peaks are really the harmonics of the initial sound. In other words, everybody is really hearing one sound, but then it breaks up into harmonics, and some people hear entire chords. It really varies depending on one's evolution. This is how the third ventricle actually looks in the brain, and this is the cross-section of it that we spoke about. And on the brain, there is a narrow band called the sensory cortex. When stimulated mechanically with a needle, for example, during operations, it creates sensations in different parts of the body, and the sensations are laid out in this pattern, and this is called the homunculus, or the little man. And as you notice, the toes are inside the fold of the brain, and then the hip, the hand, and so on. The internal organs are here. So usually the signal goes to the sensory cortex and back to the motor system, telling the body what to do, how to react to the stimulus. But what happens in the Kundalini process, that this circuit becomes activated, and one begins to experience certain parts of the body spontaneously without them being actually stimulated physically. So one doesn't really know, is it happening in the brain or is it happening on the physical level? So eventually, as this current, and he really called it not a current, but an alignment of neurons due to the stimulation of the fiber here, the nerve fiber across the brain, this alignment eventually becomes a permanent situation so that one's range of perceptions is tremendously expanded. And another thing that happens is that this current or alignment goes also through the pleasure centers, so that actually a person in this state is in a state of bliss, and a yogi sitting in a cave in Himalayas is actually having a lot of fun. So nobody's forcing them to sit for days on end cross-legged. And as Ben said, you can speed up the process of evolution, but we're all on this conveyor belt, and nature is carrying us along, and we will get there anyway, from humanhood to godhood, whether we like it or not. So eventually, as this current continues, starts at the toe and goes up around the body, and it opens up certain energy centers in the body known as chakras. And eventually the current begins to go round and round, and its function is to clear the body of stress so that it can actually perceive higher realities. And if there is a blockage anywhere, it will keep pushing through that until it's cleared so that it can actually go further. And some people can experience great discomfort because of that and not understanding what the mechanism is. And Ben wanted actually to inform the medical community, particularly the psychiatric community, about the phenomenon so that certain symptoms would not be misdiagnosed sometimes as they are as schizophrenia or actually some physical illness, which it is not. Certainly this mechanism and this phenomenon was known in antiquity, and this pharaoh is saying, my status symbol is this, that my kundalini has risen to the center in the forehead. And in this painting, it's being said, again, it's all coded in these graphic patterns. This is saying, my kundalini has reached this level and has gone even beyond the pharaohs. So this knowledge really was quite universal. Now we will continue, and we will look at the way Ben looked at reality. Because what is it that gives us our reality? And it